When we talk about the Ayush systems as alternative medicine, Ayush systems as alternative medicine, I want to ask the question, what is it alternative to? And in this audience, everyone would say, what kind of question is that? Yes, it's understood it's alternative to biomedicine. But that's precisely why we need to stop and think about what we think. Reflexivity is a very simple requirement for any thinking human being, that we revisit the premises of our own understanding and we try to ask ourselves the fundamental questions. Why do I think this? What exactly is the basis for it? What is the logic for it? And can any of these things, the basis, the logic, etc., be understood in a different way? And if we claim to be scientific, then certainly this is a requirement, because that's one of the things that science requires us to do, is to question our own presumptions. So when we say Ayush systems, I will say, because I mean, people make Ayush into the default of Ayush is Ayurveda, which I think is very misplaced. And as a social scientist, I'm very aware of the differences between these systems as well, and the distinctiveness of these systems, more importantly. We can come to that if there are questions. But you know, many of these knowledge systems have been in existence for a long time. And I am only referring to this to illustrate that medical knowledge has been around as long as human beings have been around. It's been developed systematically over a period of time. And medical knowledge, like every other knowledge, always generates new ideas, new perspectives, new inputs. And when we look at the history of how medical knowledge has developed all over the world, you find that every time new knowledges have developed, the older knowledges have sort of considered them, disagreed with them, there's been arguments, contestations, and then they come to some kind of acceptance of the new methods or not. But it's only in the last 300, 400 years or so has a medical knowledge developed, which argues that every new knowledge that it comes up with makes everything else prior to it obsolete. This has never been a perspective in the development of knowledge prior to biomedicine. It is also true of many other knowledges. I'm not going into that, even though I study knowledges other than medicine as well. So it's important for us to remember that coexistence, learning from each other, that was the norm of the development of knowledge before 400 years. So what has happened in the last 400 years? 400, 500 years, that one stream of knowledge has acquired dominance. It has acquired what we call, actually not dominance, we call hegemony. If anybody's interested, I can explain what that term means and why it is different from dominance. But it has acquired hegemony such that it accords itself the presence of the identity of being the mainstream. That is the mainstream. That is the only knowledge that truly counts. That is also related, of course, to the point that it's scientific, that we've been discussing since morning. And that allows it to then say that anything else that exists is alternative. And I would bring to you this thought as a social scientist, that knowledges that have been in the possession and practice of people for thousands of years have now, in the last 400 years, suddenly become alternative. Because one mainstream has become, one stream of knowledge has decided that it is the mainstream. Now, of course, in this implicit, there are all kinds of questions that, you know, it has proved its dominance. It is more important, etc., etc. And that's where all the problems are. But I just want to flag this, that, when we call it alternative medicine, we are doing something that is historically somewhat problematic. That's the first thing. The second thing is that and now I will talk about Ayurveda, because Ayush systems include many systems, most of which I don't know very much about. I've studied a little bit about Ayurveda, and here I would say that actually the humility is genuine because I do know very limited about things about Ayurveda. What I do know, I would like to bring here for serious consideration. The one thing that I want to say is that when we talk about Ayurveda, we have in our minds an image of a word in which A is capital. Ayurveda as with a capital A. What does that mean when we use it in English? That it is a single system of medicine. I would like to bring to your consideration that Ayurveda is a knowledge system which has a common conceptual framework, no doubt about it, conceptual epistemological framework. But this is a medical knowledge system in which ecology is very important, because it is dependent on natural sources, whether they are plant, animal, or mineral sources. These are all constituents of Ayurvedic medicines. So the ecology of the region in which Ayurveda is being practiced is very important. And that lends a kind of diversity to the practice of Ayurveda within the larger conceptual epistemological framework that all of them enjoy. Now, this is what actually makes Ayurveda such an interesting and fascinating knowledge system, where across a huge span of, a geographical span, because Ayurveda is practiced in Sri Lanka, all of the Indian subcontinent, which extends up to what we know as Bangladesh, even parts of Myanmar, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. And Ayurveda has been in constant conversation with systems like Unani, which came with Arab traders very, very long time ago, but have also been influencing Unani. It's been influenced by Unani and also influenced Unani. Also Swarikpa, of course, another very important tradition. So, therefore, there is no rigid boundary of Ayurveda, and ecology plays a very important role. And so the pharmacopoeia of Ayurveda, which is also, you will have a lot that is common. But as you can imagine, an Ayurveda which is dependent on natural sources cannot be the same between Rajasthan and Kerala. And yet, there is Ayurvedic practice across both regions. And this is a fascinating thing to understand in itself. This is the second thing that I wanted to flag for everyone. Just something to think about. So the very structure of Ayurveda can be seen to be differently constituted according to different ecologies, which does not mean that they do not have some kind of universal principles. They do. That common epistemological and conceptual universe, and that is common to practice everywhere. The third thing that I want to also say is that, and for this, of course, practitioners of Ayurveda are responsible themselves, that, from 3,000 years ago, we have all this knowledge, all done pat in different texts, and that is profound knowledge of the rishis, and therefore it is unquestionable. This is actually a misrepresentation of the textual basis of Ayurveda. Indeed, there are very old texts which again provide a great deal of the basis of the conceptual universe. But first of all, it is not known as to whether it is one person who wrote. What we know as the Charaka Samhita today is not composed by any one person, etc. So there are all these kinds of nuances. But more importantly, texts that date back to 3000 years do exist, and they are being used. They are a reference point. However, there have been continuous writing of commentaries by practitioners in every age, and like in every other aspect of Indian knowledge systems of all kinds, these commentaries are those that sometimes go to the extent of even questioning the wisdom that they have learned, because their knowledge from their particular context has taught them new things. They contribute to the pharmacopoeia, they contribute to a nuanced understanding of the conceptual framework. So there is continuous learning in Ayurveda that is available in texts up until the 19th century. So this is not some congealed tradition in time 3000 years ago. This is a dynamic and continuously growing and changing and evolving tradition. This is also true of many of the other Ayush systems as well. The fourth point that I want to make is that Ayurveda or any knowledge system, because I work with knowledges, as I told you, any knowledge system needs to be understood in terms of its philosophy, its practice, its pharmacopoeia, when we are talking about medical knowledge systems, in terms of the way it envisions itself. That should be primary. And then with that, if we are to have an assessment of that system, it has to be to take modern scientific method very seriously. It has to be a rigorous assessment of how this system works in practice, which could be a very difficult exercise. But the one exercise it should not be is based on anecdotal evidence provided by doctors. Often you will find practitioners who will say, I have seen, so-and-so patient came to me and he had been under Ayurvedic treatment, this happened and it's such a mess, and when they are going to die, they come to us. Right? The interesting thing is you can hear exactly the same kind of story told by Ayurvedic and homeopathic practitioners as well. Now, we all know in this room, since all of us are more or less committed to some foundations of scientific knowledge, building of scientific knowledge. One of them is that you cannot generalize from anecdotal evidence. Khatam. You can't do that. So if you are going to be true to the generating of any knowledge, then the knowledge about these systems also has to be done in that systematic fashion. So I would say, and this is from my 35 plus years of engaging with this issue, I would say that there needs to be a systematic understanding by all practitioners of each other's craft and each other's knowledge. There needs to be a systematic understanding. What is the other person trying to do? What is that other knowledge system trying to do? And thereby, when you have a patient who comes to you, having said that, I've been having Ayurvedic medicine and this happened to me, you should also be able to assess, okay, partly what exactly went wrong, and maybe there are certain aspects to this that I can help But that does not mean that as an Ayurvedic practitioner, I have the right to say all biomedicine is nonsense. We have the best knowledge, and anyway, it's 3,000 years old, so everything in our society is, if it comes down from ancestors, you cannot question it. Which I think is a bad way of argumentation. So I want to make it very clear right from the beginning that assessing knowledge systems is a serious business. And I find that in the last so many years that I've been, and I'm not a practitioner of any of these knowledge systems, I find it astonishing that again and again and again people come with anecdotal evidence and say with such certainty that they know that so-and-so system is nonsense and it does not work, and they have the best. And this is for all practitioners across the board. When I mean all practitioners, I don't mean all practitioners. What I mean is all practitioners who make these claims on the basis of very, very flimsy grounds of analysis, which I find very surprising. And what really disheartens me is that it doesn't seem to change. And I feel, as I call myself, a critical insider. I'm an insider because I have been watching, studying, and analyzing these systems for a long time. And I have to say that I went deep into trying to understand Ayurveda, how it works. And I could see that, it had great value. Personally, I use Ayurveda all the time. And as I said in the morning, brought up my children on Ayurveda and homeopathy, against all skepticism in the family. All that is okay. However, that does not mean that I don't bring my critical faculties into play when I'm looking at Ayurveda. That's very important. That's who I am. As a social scientist, I'm trained that, bringing your critical faculty into examining something that attracts you a lot is very important. Because that is when you will have an analytically, the possibility of a rigorous analysis comes only from that kind of critical understanding. So these are the 3 or 4 things I wanted to say in the beginning, and I'm very happy to take questions and to respond to this. I've written about these things as well. So happy to share. I've shared a couple of articles. I'd be happy to share more. So having said this, now we then come to the question of evidence. What I'm doing, I must have is that I'm actually presenting all these things somewhat telegraphically, because, it's the end of the day and a lot has to happen in the next 5 days. But I'm tempted to share with you what I know. So I'm just sort of putting out each of these things that I've said has a huge literature, lots of analysis behind it, and I'm happy to share it later. But I'll spend a little more time talking about the whole evidence question, which is, of course, one of the most problematic ones. We've been discussing it in a particular way. I will now, sort of try to present a somewhat different, but certainly complementary understanding of this whole question of evidence. Now, I want to take you a little bit to the fundamentals. All of us study any knowledge system through a language. And language carries with it conceptual, philosophical categories. It carries metaphors, which we sort of sometimes even unknowingly, we are incorporating them into our understanding and working with them. I think it's very important to become aware of what kind of structure of language we are using when we study any knowledge system. And this is a slightly sort of, I too am, sort of really articulating it exactly like this for the first time. So do stop me and say if things are unclear. Most Ayurvedic texts, and I believe it's also true of many other Ayush texts as well, most of them are not only written in Sanskrit or any of the regional languages. Not all Ayurvedic texts are written in Sanskrit, by the way. They are not only written in Prakrit, which was a spoken language of ancient India, but all these commentaries that I was telling you about, all been written in the regional languages. So you'll find hundreds of texts in Malayalam, in Kannada, in Tamil, in Bengali, in Hindi. And the interesting thing is that the structure of these texts are all in the form of poetry. And in Bengal, like you say in Malayalam, you call them Vaidyans, the practitioners. In Bengal, they are called Kaviraj, the one who is the master of the poem. And like what you were saying, Sanal, in the morning, that, there was not that kind of distinction between the person who is the poet and the healer, or the one who builds, for that matter, because actually not only medical texts, all texts were written in poetic form. That's number one. Second, that these texts and the epistemology of Ayurveda is part of a larger philosophy in which the human being is seen as a part of the cosmos. The cosmos is seen in terms of 5 elements. The human being also has 5 elements. So I don't know if any of you here are, follow a daily ritual. But a small daily ritual I was taught is that in which you recall the cosmos every day from the 5 fingers of your hand and say that these are the different elements which I recognize in the cosmos and I recognize inside me, and therefore I am part of the cosmos is part of me, and therefore I am responsible for the cosmos. A word that was used some time ago and is used a lot with medicine, of course. I want to start with the idea that, responsibility is absolutely crucial to the understanding of this philosophy. We can come back to it at another point. So it is written in the poetry form. In poetry form, it is about the larger philosophy in which the human being is seen as part of the cosmos. And so the understanding of the human body is not only in terms of its anatomical parts. There is an understanding in Ayurveda of the human being in terms of the different organs. But what is it that creates the unity that is the body? Because we all know, those of us who understand anything of medicine, have studied medicine, we all know that there are different parts of the body, different organs in the body. But there's something that binds them, which makes them into a whole, where when you have jaundice, which is actually a problem of the liver, it is your eyes that say that you have jaundice. But when your eye becomes yellow, you don't go to an ophthalmologist. When your eye becomes yellow, you know that there's something wrong with your liver. That's why you go to a physician. So this is a different, this is one way. This is the way that this is a foundational perspective for Ayurveda. And you're wondering, okay, so why is it relevant? What makes it relevant is that the perspective of the body being part of the cosmos and the cosmos being part of the body means that you are actually trying to understand the body as a combination of the physical body, the mind, and the spirit. You do not see the 3 things as separate, and you do not see that the material body is all that is going to be addressed when you are ill. So all illness can be understood in terms of a shift in the material aspect of the body. That material aspect itself is something that is visible and something that is not. So the humors are not visible, the doshas are not visible, but the physical organs, you know what they are. But you are trying to understand the correlation between the doshas and the physical organs. And you are relating it, because if your body is 72% water, have I got that right? Or more? It's a lot, right? It's 75% water. Then you cannot but be influenced by the moon. It's logical. Because the moon has a profound influence on water. And if your body is so much water, then it is going to be influenced by the moon. So there are several levels of, should I use this word? Correlation that's happening between the cosmos and the body in trying to understand illness. And therefore, what happens is that the parameters of judging an illness, how you diagnose, what prognosis you have, and the line of treatment. I'm using the terminology that everybody is familiar with. So that line of treatment will be related to the diagnosis. The diagnosis is in turn something that seeks to incorporate the visible and the non-visible. So it is the knowable and sometimes the unknowable. And this, I'm not trained in Ayurveda, so I have learned this secondhand, so you'll forgive me if I can't go beyond this. But the reason why it is important for the discussion here is that, therefore, the language of this knowledge system embodies a lot about the unknowable, the inchoate, the invisible, as part and parcel of trying to understand what is happening to the human body. Given that the language of medicine, and when I say language, I mean, the worldviews it carries, has been about positive evidence, understanding. It's a positivist perspective of understanding body illness and wellness. Therefore, if you view the Ayurvedic text from the perspective of this positive understanding of biomedicine, then all of that is going to seem a lot of what the most polite will call it spiritual. And the others who are impatient with so many of those categories which seem liminal to them, they will call it mumbo jumbo, because that is not seen to be relevant to the disease which is physical. But Ayurveda does not understand a disease to be only physical. It's very important to recognize also that it does not see illness as physical. I'll come back to this point. So it's not as if all of Ayurveda is about understanding something in some deeply cosmos-linked perspective either. There's a lot that's very foundationally material. I'll come back to this. So the point is that when we want to understand what this knowledge system is about, we have to take this into account if we are to understand it properly. It may seem very alien, it may seem difficult, all that is understood. But unless and until we are able to give it that much of a shot to understand, what are they trying to say? What are they trying to do? Those were absolutely worthless and had no relevance whatsoever. And the most interesting book that I've read about this has been written by an Indian, wonderful sociologist of science called Jeetpal Singh Oberoi, who has a book on the European modernity, where he talks about the other mind of Europe. So we are not, it's not about the Europeans versus us. No, it's not about it's about a colonizing process, which is also a colonizing, dominating process in Europe, which we need to understand what was going on there and what they lost as a result. And here, before anybody begins to worry whether I am a wolf in sheep's clothing, and here you have a rabid right-winger who's emerged from North India and said, oh my God, we thought she was a friend of Sunil's and Naveen, and what is she talking about? I want to make it very, very clear that I am not, I have a very clear point of difference with the kind of, I would say, frightened right-wing position on tradition. And if you are really, truly frightened, that's when you will try to frighten others so much. I mean, we were talking about psychology earlier, so I thought, let me contribute my two-penny bit about right-wing ferociousness. It comes out of this worry. It comes out of this anxiety of losing something that is precious. But it is deeply unproblematized, to say the least, in its understanding of tradition. For instance, the fact that they constantly talk about tradition as something that Rishi Munis have written. All the Rishi Munis are, of course, men, right? And they have always only written in Sanskrit, and everything was fixed 3,000 years ago. All of these things are nonsensical, to say the least. This is not the tradition that we are trying to, and there's no need to call it tradition. Tradition is a word which we've translated in Hindi. We use parampara, which I find deeply problematic, because tradition seems to be something that is fixed, and nothing that I know about these knowledge systems is fixed. They are dynamic, they have evolved, and if they have suddenly lost their epistemic value, then we need to understand the historical processes by which that epistemic value was lost. Let's be honest to ourselves that we participated in that erasure of those epistemologies in ways that was not necessary. But which does not mean that, this does not continue, but it does not mean that it has to be just like that, or that was all there was to be. And that will take me to the next point that I want to say about the evidence base of Ayurveda. So following from this, so if we are to understand the texts and practice in terms of all the parameters that they stand for, all the parameters that involve them, then we would need to systematically see how evidence is constructed from those parameters and see how we can understand it. Because what I'm trying to say here is that when you look at different epistemologies, when you look at different philosophical perspectives on illness, wellness, disease, and treatment, then what amounts to evidence? Again, something that Sunil said in the morning, how you construct evidence will vary. First of all, let us begin to see this as a possibility. We think evidence is self-evident. There's nothing self-evident about evidence. Everything that we today think is evidence has been carefully constructed. And that's good. There's a lot of evidence that's very good. We use it for so many different things. When I say that, no, I would like to hold the classes in this particular way because we know it works, and this is the evidence for it. All of us are doing it all the time. But what we need to be is self-conscious about the fact that that evidence is a construct. So, if this evidence that we are all talking about and taking for granted, we begin to see that it is a construct, it means that from all kinds of other epistemologies, other kinds of evidence can be also constructed. The human mind has created these evidence that we today are seeing as foolproof. So the human mind will also construct other kinds of evidence. What's the problem? If we begin to see that that possibility exists and how it can be constructed. So if we go with at least this particular understanding, then we can begin to see what has been happening actually in Ayurveda. And we need to see, how in the post-colonial period, for instance, how Ayurveda has actually been dealing with this issue of evidence. It's not today, no? Right from the beginning, this question of evidence, but ever since RCTs became a basis for the biomedical pharmacopoeia, the pressure on Ayurveda was huge. So I am sure most of you know that the Government of India created these central councils for research in Ayurveda and Siddha, who were expected to validate their respective pharmacopoeias. Now, the interesting thing is that when we are talking about validation, we are talking about the validation of a pharmacopoeia that comes from a specific worldview of specific epistemology. But the parameters by which they would be validated would come from a completely different epistemology. So tell me, does this medicine cure headache or not? But headache is understood very differently in Ayurveda. It is not understood as something that is happening in the head, even if it is manifest in the head. We were talking about all this during the day, right? So when you have a headache, a Vaidya is supposed to ask many different questions about other aspects of how you are feeling, and to figure out what might be the more likely reason for you to be having a headache at this point in time, and will give you a medicine accordingly. So in all likelihood, they will first, and when they are unclear, or sometimes very, very clearly, they will go first for your gut. Because it's an understanding in Ayurveda that your brain is really in your gut. If you can manage your gut, you can manage your health. So they will give you something that will settle your gut. And that too, settling the gut also has so many interpretations. So therefore, the perspective is very important, but a lot of the research that was done was to validate Ayurvedic pharmacopoeia according to biomedical parameters. So it remained second-rate, very insubstantial, and always defensive. Nahi, our medicines can also do this. Our medicines can also do that. But no knowledge system should need to be so defensive about what it knows. Unless you begin the experiment or validation process with the assumption that you are probably second-rate. The second thing, so that's one kind of research. There's a lot that can be said about this, but I'll talk about only the second aspect, which I find very much more exciting. A lot of individual Vaidyas decided that they would try to create parameters of research which would stem from the epistemology of Ayurveda, but be translated into categories of rigorous categories, which could be understood by biomedical researchers. I hope everyone's with me on this. So parameters will be derived from Ayurveda, but they will be translated in a way that biomedical researchers can understand. So the whole approach was to be rigorous, but to be understood. To have a conversation, not a contestation. And that required translation. Now we all know how difficult translation is. If I were to say something in Hindi and try to translate it into English, we know how difficult it's going to be. And when you're translating across conceptual and epistemological categories, that makes it that much more difficult. But I have, in one of the articles that I sent Sanil, I have actually documented the conversations undertaken by 3 Vaidyans I know. two of whom have unfortunately passed away. One passed away in July. I have learned a lot from him, a man called Ashok Vaidya, actually, in Bombay. But the third, who is in Kerala, 10 years younger than me, God bless him with a long life. He's done some amazing work on creating randomized clinical trials for Ayurveda and inviting biomedical practitioners to test their medicines on a similar condition. The condition he chose was a difficult one, rheumatoid arthritis. And he created a whole protocol which he systematically explained to researchers at the National Institutes of Health in the US, Bethesda, which everyone knows is absolutely considered to be in biomedicine the mecca of research in medicine. And because Ram Manohar had a long history, a background of doing rigorous work, he was deeply respected already. So, of course, those people were willing to at least listen to him. But he sat and systematically translated the categories of Ayurveda that he would use in order to have a trial for rheumatoid arthritis that they had. And he said, you have methotrexate, you want to have a trial on methotrexate? Fine. We will have our trial and let us do the two trials together. That's the number one thing he convinced them. Second, they said, okay, so we'll do a 6-week trial and we'll compare. He said, no. No Ayurvedic practitioner worth their salt would claim that rheumatoid arthritis can begin to be solved in 6 weeks. We need 6 months. So my trial is going to go on for 6 months. You're most welcome to come and monitor it. Please participate. Every day I will explain to you what we are doing, what we are administering, what we are expecting, etc. And if it is negative, I give you my word that it's going to be all fair, square, open, transparent. So the NIH agreed to that and they said, all right, come along and we'll do it. And let's do the trial here. And then what does Ram Manohar say? He said, sorry, I cannot do an Ayurvedic trial in the US. You don't have the entire setup for it. We have the setup back at home and we have a very good setup. But the good thing is that in India also, you can do a very good biomedical trial also. Look at the pride of this man. So when we talk about pride in your knowledge system and also being able to learn, see the fact is that we do damn good biomedicine even in India. That is something that we need to also be as proud of. So he invited them. The NIH came to do their trial in India. And they had a parallel trial. They did theirs for 6 weeks. They did theirs for 6 months. Totally transparent, communicating all the time. And it was published in the Journal of Rheumatoid Diseases. Also an ACE international peer-reviewed journal, etc. So Ashok Vaidya and Sharadini Dahanukar, the two other Vaidyas, the older Vaidyas, had actually set in motion many of this kind of translation, which, in their own hospitals in Bombay. And this, I am saying that this kind of, if you're going to call it an RCT, it's a trial, it's a clinical trial. It's not it also has elements of randomization and randomization that's good enough to establish certain kinds of results. And given that the NIH was also closely involved in this, so there were no cutting corners in any of this. So what I'm saying is that the interesting thing is many anthropologists, sociologists who were studying Asian medical systems for a long time, people who I learned from, a man called Charles Leslie, great anthropologist who had studied this, had a book out in 1976, which we all read, to begin with. And Charles Leslie, he wrote in 1992, one of the last few things that he wrote. He wrote to say that, to have an Ayurvedic, to have a clinical trial according to Ayurvedic parameters is not a possibility. It's not going to happen. After he wrote this, he was very old by then, and I met him at a conference. And I told him, I said, Professor Leslie, you are totally mistaken. Because there are people who are working on this, and this is going to happen. And he sort of looked at me, he said, name me one person. And at that time, I just about knew Ram Manohar, and I knew the kind of work that he was doing and what he was thinking, and we would discuss. And I said, there's this guy, he is going to do it. He said, sadly, Charlie Leslie won't live to see it. I said, maybe not, but this will happen in the lifetime of the next 20, 25, in the lifetime of modern Ayurveda. So what I'm trying to say is that when you intend to have a conversation, when you talk about, I genuinely believe that most doctors are genuinely committed to the well-being of their patients. I never questioned that. But that commitment can include a healthy, positive, and critical engagement with another knowledge system. I think that is a possibility that we should think about seriously. Critical, let it be critical. But there should at least be an engagement. There cannot be a dismissal on the premise of certain anecdotal evidence. And that is something that we find, very, very baffling. Spoke to Ram Manohar yesterday, because whenever I keep in touch, and we're trying to do some work together. And I said, what happened after your trial? I mean, if your trial turned out so well, then it should have excited the entire Ayurvedic community to do it. And, now we have, money that can come not only from the government. This government is supposedly committed to Ayush. So they should be able to give money for this. But there are big companies in the US. Capitalism has grown. So much research in modern technology has happened because modern corporations have invested in R&D. How come we don't have it here? And he said, Madhulika, the Ayurvedic community seems to have lost that confidence that they can do it. Some of them who are very good know, and please, I don't know whether he was meant to be quoted like this. So it's not, please don't quote him verbatim, but his sense is that those who really know the text well, the practices well, they feel that they are also in that corner where they feel that their worldview is irreconcilable with biomedicine. They feel that they are too different, they are too opposed to each other. What is the point of a conversation? And the others who are good, are encountering biomedicine every day, have read, and I'm sure many of you know, but so many good Ayurvedic practitioners can read every single diagnostic tool that appears in the market every day. They can read all, and they have their own interpretation of these diagnostic tools. So they are extremely bright and very engaged, individuals. And I said, why aren't these people taking up the research? And he says that his hunch is that people are very intimidated by the entire atmosphere in which they barely survive as a credible knowledge system. And they feel that they cannot actually come. Now, this is a very unhealthy symptom of any society. That you have, and all of us, in some form or the other, we do use the knowledge about Ayurveda. It's not about the pharmacopoeia alone, We all know what foods to eat seasonally. We all know when you have a bad throat. We all know that the one thing you don't do is to drink anything cold. These are also the foundations that come from Ayurveda. And it's not like we learned it from a text. These are lived knowledges. These are embodied knowledges. And for us to deny an embodied knowledge is not worthwhile, because an embodied knowledge is what connects you to your own physical world. Whatever it is we are living in India, in its ecology, we need to understand what works for us here and what doesn't. So what I would urge is simply to literally allow ourselves the ability to converse. And conversation means you try to understand the other person's language. It's like this morning, who said, but this can only provide an ashvasam. I think that's what he said he said, I don't know how to translate, but this is what we use in Malayalam. Now, ashvasam for me was not difficult at all. My language is also derived from Sanskrit, and this is a word that was very easy for me to understand. So I didn't stop him and say, no, somebody tried to translate. No, I know. This is what he's getting at vaguely. If I were to write about it, I might have to make more effort. But it's about understanding the parameters of another language and to say, yes, yours is a credible language. And this is why I'm extremely critical of most Bengalis. The two Bengalis will get together, even if there are 10 other people, they will start talking in Bengali. It's such a bad habit. But that shows a kind of arrogance and disrespect to other languages, which is clearly the hallmark of most Bengalis, and something that I absolutely would not do. So this is what I'm saying is about knowledge systems. All knowledge systems are these very distinct languages, and we owe it to ourselves to be able to draw upon different languages. It makes us richer. And that's why, so there are so many reasons for us to engage in these conversations. And I think that that's an invitation that we should take up wholeheartedly.
Totally the whole thing. Use biomedicine, right? Do like that. But anyway, because of the lack of doctors with MBBS qualification, many systems in our country are recruiting doctors with BAMS, BHMS, EMYS, etc. But these people are sitting in the PHCs and prescribing paracetamol that we have put as prosperity, which I don't know whether that's the. I think it's sincere to both parents.
And the point is that when you have a certain medicine which will have a certain kind of effect, the rest of your diet is structured in such a way that the side effects of that will be managed by the diet. Also, you will notice that not only are all drugs compound drugs, but then there are certain combinations of drugs that are always given to you. That combination is given to you because the Vaidyan knows the effect of one which is going to be managed by the other. So, this knowledge of what that compound drugs can do and how they are going to affect your system is going to be, is something that only the Vaidyan knows and will give it to you. So the point is, if you follow a prescription and to the T, you have all the drugs and you have the diet that has been prescribed to you, the pathyam that's been then you have no side effects, because the parameter of side effect has been managed in that prescription. And every Ayurvedic physician will tell you, depending on your condition, of course, that have it for a few days, come and tell me what happened. And then they will tweak the medicines according to what your constitution is responding. Which then brings me to the third point, that when you say that you keep on having arishtams and avaleham, why would you have it? That is your responsibility, not the systems. Not even your Vaidyan, you're condemning the system, that it spoils your liver. But nowhere in Ayurveda is it said that you can have an arishtam unsupervised. Arishtams also, they are good for you, but they have to be supervised. Would you have antibiotics without supervision? And if you have antibiotics for 2 days and give it up and not have the 5-day thing, every doctor will tell you absolutely rightly that you're going to develop resistance. Don't do this. It's a bad practice. So it's bad practice to have. So we think that Ayurveda is very good. So let us have this arishtam for this period of time when you're not supposed to. So I am just saying that the argumentation has to have some consistency. That when you have a medicine, it has to be part of the positive, the coherent treatment system, that is delineated by that knowledge. If we don't follow it, then that's a mistake we are making. Okay, but the point about ethical practices, I'm sure you will agree that malpractice can be found anywhere. I doubt if anybody in this room would agree that only Ayush doctors have malpractices. All kinds of doctors have malpractices. There's no question about it. Everyone will have 10 stories. So what? Two things that I want to say. One, malpractices are bad. They should be condemned. They should be imprisoned. They should be fined. Absolutely, there should be a law against any malpractice, including malpractices by Ayush doctors. Equally importantly, we cannot judge a knowledge system by malpractice. The knowledge system is separate, and there are good practitioners. We can't judge that, there are many of them doing bad practices. There are so many doctors who do complete nonsense. People who are doing hysterectomies, people who are doing cesareans. We know these things. But do we judge biomedicine by the people? Do we judge gynecology by the fact that people do cesarean when it's not necessary? No, that would be stupid. So I'm just asking you to employ the same parameters to them. That's all.
So basically, the practitioners right now can be categorized into qualified versus non-qualified. That is, qualified means that is a legally accepted for the system of medicine, either in the modern medicine or Ayush, or rather those are not qualified and practicing. These are all, you can say, quacks. And in these qualified practitioners, whether they practice ethical practice or unethical practice. So whether it is a modern medicine doctor writing Ayurveda drugs or vice versa. So these need to be made sure that that is a qualified practitioner. The problem is this is the society thinks that all the herbal medicines providers are actually Ayurveda doctors. So that is the society need to be sensitized and to how to identify the qualified practitioners. So that is the most important thing, and the society thinks that all the herbal medicines are side effects free. That is a reason why most of these kind of medicines they are taking without the prescription or without the consultation of a doctor.
Ayurveda is such a deep knowledge system. With 5 years of degree, you may not even be actually able to. I am inclined to agree with you completely there. So even if it is legally and that's the degree that's being awarded by the institutions and so on, I would say that it takes a long time for that kind of embodied knowledge to be understood. So that's an additional qualification that I would put over and above what you're saying, in agreement with what she said. Absolutely. So these the thing is that, in this, I would say that this notion that Ayurvedic medicines or all herbal medicines are side effect free is absolutely the brainchild of the industry that has produced herbal medicines. I have studied, the advertising patterns. In my book, which was published in 2009, I have a whole chapter on the advertising and how they have positioned their medicines in a way to say that this no side effects, no side effects. But it has to come with a very clear rider that no side effects also means what you do. It's not about what it does not do, but what it does do and how that should be managed. You cannot say that it can be a free for all kind of thing. And that is the responsibility not of the practitioner. It is the responsibility of those who produce the medicines. The companies that produce the medicines, they are wholly responsible. And starting from Dabur and all the others, the worst of them is Patanjali, making claims which totally, sort of are destroying the image of Ayurveda. Actually, I find it, so disheartening that an absolute, charlatan is running this company, making these profits and completely denigrating the system altogether. So there, I think practitioners really need to distance themselves from these companies and to say, you cannot do this. There has to be a kind of a campaign by practitioners to have some kind of limitations, restrictions on the kind of campaigning, the advertising you can do. That's a very serious problem. And you're right. I mean, how are you going to counter this mentality that people have now acquired about the no side effect of herbal medicine, which for 100 years of advertising has been doing? How are we going to do it? Tell me. So difficult, no?
Can say a new thing. So basically, the central government actually, deleted the way the states, right to, address the this licensing, the advertising of these Ayush medicines. So the Supreme Court has, made a judgment to, reiterate that, the state has the authority to, regulate this Ayush medicines also. So because most of the medications or that is advertising, and these are not regulated. More, I can say, as per the Magic Remedies Act and all the these legal measures, especially when it comes to the sexual issues. So these are all never been regulated, or rather, I can say most of the there's newspapers propagate it because they get a more revenue out of it. So we have a this capsule, people who are interested in these have a Kutaima, it's called Capsule Kerala, and we have from various areas, you can say from drug controller to you can say activists to all those things, from Ayurveda, Homeo, all the system of medicines we have. And so you have given a case against this madam, this Ayurveda preparation. Now there's a Supreme Court has Patanjali. No, Patanjali has. So we are doing, that the thing is, so basically, unless we proactively do these things, people think that because the system and the government, as well as from our side, we need to sensitize the common man. So these are the actual problems. And unless we, tell, so people believe that this is the way it need to be.
Context of public health. Because public health today, we think that's a very good thing, but in my view, it's something which we need to really critique, this idea of public health. So one thing which they say, the public health means some kind of a therapy which is each individual in the collective can have equal validity. Another is more dangerous thing is it is translatable across like criminology, psychiatry, prison management. Now we even have international relationship, but because if you want to apply for visa, you need a vaccination certificate. Suddenly medical evidence can play a role in international thing. So it has to be translated, across various things. And another thing is certain medical measures are valid only at a public health level. For example, vaccine will be effective only if everybody takes it. So these are all very frightening aspects. So is there any possibility of Ayurveda we practicing it outside this public health paradigm, or they also? Because I have a great fascination for quacks. For this whole idea that there has to be a registration for medical practice is something which we are unquestioningly accepted. I have the great musicians I listen to musicians without
Degrees.
licensing, and many of the best homeo doctors I know are not trained ones in the thing. Right? They are software engineers, physicists. They just pick it up as part of training. We can pick it up, provided we keep it out of this public. So do you think the possibility of a non-public health from Ayurveda?
It's a priceless question, and one that I would be very happy to address. But since you asked me to do a second lecture, why don't I leave it for that? So yes, there's a lot. I haven't thought as extensively on all of these other dimensions of public health that you're talking about, but much more on the ground. I'm a student of politics, and for me, what works on the ground, it holds far more fascination, to be very honest. And frankly, in the global south, there's so much to be done on the ground. So I focus much more on that, and I'm actually interested in an Ayurveda in public health, which is outside the pale of this. I'd be very happy to.
This imbibing of these smaller groups, the knowledge from smaller groups, which later became something that we call Ayurveda now. Could there be that? My other question is, if we take something from traditional medicine and create an evidence for that, for its efficacy or effectiveness, whatever it is, does it still be a part of traditional medicine, or will it become part of evidence-based medicine? If it becomes part of evidence-based medicine, is there any difference between the appropriation that Ayurveda might have had done, I don't know, I'm not sure, from the local traditions from which it has acquired it? Is it any different? Like later on, as evidence-based medicine is going to grow into something like Ayurveda might have grown in India over many years. That is my question. Those are the two questions I wanted to pose. One example I wanted to give was that there is this medicine called artesunate, which is being used for malaria, and this came from Chinese traditional medicine. Now, I forgot her name. That scientist, I think she is from China itself, and she got Nobel Prize for that discovery, I think. And what she did was, what was used in the traditional medicine, she isolated that particular thing. They experimented on it, and they found out which compound in that particular traditional medicine was curing malaria. And now it is a part of what we call as evidence-based medicine. So in the future, when we call evidence-based medicine, is it going to be something that is restricted to modern medicine or, something like that? And I don't know when, no, I have also started questioning what evidence-based medicine means. So that's why this question came up. Now, in that context, I'm again asking, when you say that because of evidence-based medicine, other systems or medicines are becoming obsolete, is it actually becoming obsolete? I think you use...
Never use such a word. What is obsolete? Obsolescence is a concept that is carried by modern knowledge, that once a new knowledge comes into place, then old knowledges become obsolete. That is a perspective that comes from modern knowledge.
Okay,
I am not saying that they become.
Yeah, okay. Then I thought that was what that meant. Okay. So that was the other question I wanted to ask. And regarding interdisciplinary research that is happening, yesterday there was a paper presented at that conference, which was by an Ayurveda practitioner again. He was doing his PG, I think, in mental health. In that, what he did was, among transgenders, how does the yoga, practice of yoga, how does that affect the stress level in transgender population? That was a study that he did. But again, it could be because of this, how you classify disease in Ayurveda and modern medicine is different, that when you look at the methodology that they are using, they're trying to definitely fit into the methodology that we use. So it's kind of like really rudimentary. I don't know if I can use that, but very for any research that we have certain standards that we have to follow. There is a certain protocol. Like, for example, if you're doing a systematic review, there is a checklist called PRISMA, and you need to ensure that you have done it according to that, so that it is transparent. And that is one thing that we always say about these evidence, that it is transparent, it is repeatable. And when you look at such checklists, or when you even just look at the face value of it, even then you can say that it is a very biased study. And so how can is there a need for a separate system of analysis to be developed for Ayurveda?
Absolutely. So I'll start with that. See, that's exactly what I would urge you to read. I'll send you Ram Manohar's paper that was published in the Journal of Rheumatoid Disease, and take a look and see how protocols are developed when you come from a completely different epistemology. How, if they try to fit into your, obviously it will look rudimentary and very crude, because the points of correspondence, if you see them in a very crude way, I mean, you're looking for correspondence where there is, or maybe in most cases there isn't. Something as complex as mental health of transgender people through yoga, every single category is alien to you. Right? And how yoga sees mental well-being. I mean, I've been practicing yoga for a long time, only just beginning to figure out what it is doing to me. Forget about what I would try to understand patients and so on. So to translate these categories is not easy. So if you try to fit, it's like, I am this size, and if I try to wear an excess size of dress, what is it going to look like? It's going to look crude. So it's the same thing. So first of all, I would say that we need to it only happens because they think, researchers in yoga think that unless they use your categories, you will not even allow them to present the paper in the conference. And they are desperate to be acknowledged. They are desperate to be seen. They are desperate to be recognized. So they try these desperate measures which don't work, right? So absolutely, if there is, I don't know what you understand by interdisciplinary research. But interdisciplinary means that first of all, you have to respect the other knowledge system as a discipline. That it has its own frame of analysis. It has its own philosophical concepts. It has its own conceptual basis. First of all, you have to recognize that. And not to say, acha, do you have what we have? We call this. Do you have a corresponding thing for this? It doesn't work like that. So you have to start from first principles. That's a very difficult thing to do and takes long patience. If you say that, I should get my API points so that I can get my next promotion, you can't do this research like this. Then to go to your whole thing of, it's a very interesting, you've posed the question in a very interesting way. This whole thing of looking at how Ayurveda grew as a discipline by appropriating knowledges from different traditions and corresponding it to evidence-based medicine. It's a very interesting correspondence. So first of all, historically, that's what I was saying to you. All knowledges grow like this. They grow by, they have a frame in which the more you can accommodate and appropriate, it's a power relation. That's why, I didn't use the term politics of knowledge, which is what I use when I teach in political science. Because relationships between knowledges are in levels of power. It's a power structure. And so, which knowledge system, the parameters of which knowledge system are going to establish themselves as the most important or the most influential in interpreting, in explaining, that knowledge system then has the ability to appropriate from all others and bring it into, and that creates a canon, right? So if Ayurveda has grown as a canon, it has grown by, learning. So many historians of medicine say, it's a Brahminical tradition that appropriated all the tribal health systems and so on. Well, yes, that's one way of looking at it, but it's not only Brahminical. No? That's the whole point. Ayurvedic practice is more than Brahminical, thank God. If it was left only to those blessed upper caste oppressors, then it would have been much less interesting. But it isn't. So, but it is a power structure, which is a power relation, not only within the caste order, but there are other kinds of power structures. So this is something that we need to understand about how all knowledges grow. So it would have grown like that, yes. And the point is that's why I began by saying that we are not interested in some turf war of Ayurveda with a capital A, which is mine, and biomedicine with a capital B, which is yours. No. We are talking about medical knowledge, the valuable medical knowledge that comes from different perspectives of the body, mind, spirit. And let's see what we can do to just be healthier people. And now from this basic conversation we've had all day, how difficult it is to what seems like a very foundational thing, but it is about the politics of knowledge. When you're talking about evidence base and figuring out the evidence, and if you're creating knowledge, you are casting the knowledge of Ayurveda into a kind of evidence base, then does it remain Ayurveda or does it become new evidence-based medicine? That all generates on, it all depends on how you generate the evidence in the first place. If you generate evidence the way Ram Manohar is doing, he is taking received wisdom of Ayurveda a step further while remaining within the parameters. The epistemological parameters don't change. He's taking it further. So I would say that that is modern Ayurveda. And if what you say, about the Chinese research, but this is what biomedicine has been doing for the last 300 years, picking up active molecules. So where do you think biomedicine has developed all its knowledge from? Not from the air, not by experimentation alone. Yeah, what does it experiment with? It experiments with knowledge that is already available on the ground. And then it has transformed it into a completely different analytical frame. And that analytical frame is the synthesizing of molecules, not only isolating, but synthesizing the molecule. Right? And this is where I would say that it appropriates the basic knowledge, that's for sure. But the fact that it works by separating isolating the molecule and then synthesizing immediately puts it in a different epistemological frame. This Chinese medicine does not work on the basis of molecules. All Chinese medicine are compound drugs, as are Ayurvedic medicines. So even if you identify Tinospora cordifolia and you pick up the active principle and then you make it into medicine for neurological medicines, which is what this is used for, that does not transform, that does not make this evidence-based medicine, which is not Ayurveda, because Ayurveda still remains, because Ayurveda will use Tinospora cordifolia in a very different way. And it never uses any one. So this whole Himalaya drug company creating all these standalone ashwagandha and this thing makes no sense. Unless you do it like, what you have in Malayalam a word, no, for green medicine shop. What is it you have? Where you can buy raw drugs. Where you can buy, and your Vaidya has told you that you combine these in this particular way and you have it in this way. So that is very different. Himalaya Drug Company is making them all into tablets and giving them to biomedical doctors and saying, this says this can be used for this. I would like to ask you, do you think this is an ethical practice? I don't think so. They may have all the clinical trials and so on to back it. They may have done everything. But from the Ayurvedic point of view, where no herbal composition can be had by itself, it is always in combination with others, and you have to explain why. It's unethical practice.
Excuse me, ma'am. And if we are prescribing in our prescription, and if something goes wrong, the medico-legally, this is a
Violation.
We should not do. And I don't prescribe things. I can send to an Ayurveda doctor, but I should not prescribe the herbal medications. Because
See, my dear, can I just tell you that when I say that doctors are doing it, we have to go by the understanding of what is happening at scale. No, it's not about whether individual doctors do it or not. The point is,
legally it is wrong. Legally, we should not do that.
Now, are you telling me that Himalaya Drug Company is doing a large-scale illegal business which nobody can do anything about? No, but that's precisely the point. They have cast it in a way. When you say that, they have generated evidence for ashwagandha, and they've made ashwagandha and turmeric and other tablets, those are not being prescribed by Ayurvedic doctors. Himalaya Drug Company totally by its promotion targets only biomedical doctors. And they are prescribing these medicines in combination with their own medicines. Now, look, the point is, see, if I am only talking about, I'm not talking about the legal aspect. I'm talking about the epistemological aspect. What is that medicine doing in your prescriptive framework, where actually you don't know how it complements or relates to other synthesized drugs that you're prescribing? How do you know? Whereas when an Ayurvedic practitioner is prescribing, at least he or she knows what it is supposed to do. At the end of it, whatever happens to your body, nobody can say. That's a different matter. But in terms of just the epistemology of that treatment, it does not become evidence-based medicine in any way that way. It depends on how you generate that evidence and in what treatment regimen do you use it. That is very
And the complication, you can see around a serious complication of post-vaccinal encephalitis, that is 12 cases per million was there. And of that, around 30% it is fatal. So, I can say these are the complications of any, I can say kind of a vaccines or anything. So, but we need to think about the prioritize what are the benefits. So you cannot say 100% safe medicine, or rather can say legally safe, or rather can say, what do you say, medically safe? What do you say? Use of medications, all those things are now, you cannot say 100% everything. All right.